All right, guys, a short review on the market for loanable funds. I'm going to be covering what the market is and then also how to approach FRQs dealing with the market for loanable funds. All right, so the market for loanable funds, it is in a way similar to the money market, but it's different because it's not actually money. It's just what's available to borrow. So it's loanable funds, not money in that sense. And instead of dealing with nominal interest rates like the money market is, we're dealing with the real interest rate, the adjusted for inflation interest rate. So two things to note. On the horizontal axis, you want to make sure you have quantity of loanable funds down there. On the vertical axis, you need to include real interest rates. If you don't put real interest rates on this model, it will get you dinged for points. So make sure you got that. Now, our downward sloping demand curve, the demand for loanable funds, is the investors. It's the people that are looking for money, that want money to borrow, that want these funds to actually use and usually invest, or in the case of government, to spend on transfer payments or other government spending. So it's people that want to borrow the funds represents the demand curve. Now the supply curve is the people that save, or the people that want to put their money somewhere to gain interest from that investment. So individuals, and then sometimes the foreign inflow of financial capital coming from other countries. If we have higher interest rates, they're going to put their funds here. So the supply is made up by the savers, the people saving money that want those interest rates paid to them. So it's provided by lenders through savings. So this is the market for loanable funds. It gives us our real interest rates, and it kind of identifies a price for the funds that people are going to borrow. All right, now the rate of return is an important concept. The rate of return is the annual percentage that a company gets when investing in something. Say they buy new machinery, how much will they get out of that? Say they build a new building, open a new business, how much will they get back? What is their annual percentage return? Now that rate of return in relationship to the interest rate is very important. You can think of the rate of return as kind of the marginal benefit of the decision, whereas the marginal cost is that annual interest rate. So if the rate of return exceeds the interest rate that they can pay on this loan, then they will make that decision. So the more firms are willing to borrow at lower rates, we can make this assumption because there are going to be a lot more opportunities at lower rates of return than there are going to be at higher rates of return. So more firms are willing to borrow at those lower interest rates. So as interest rates go down, because of our downward sloping curve, more people, more firms are going to borrow money from these loanable funds. So that downward sloping demand curve. Now the supply curve represents all the savings that exist. Now savings can be broken down in a few different categories. Private savings, that's me and you. That's the household savings. We put our money into savings accounts. They pay an interest to us. Okay, our marginal propensity to save, when that changes, so does the private savings. Changes in income, if I am earning more money, I'm going to be willing to put more into savings. Now, public savings is tax revenue minus government spending. So this is kind of a foreign concept to us here because we rarely see a government surplus. Most of the time they are borrowing to spend. So they are deficit spending. They don't have any public savings. So our national savings is the total of public and private savings. So in most countries that deficit spend, the national savings is going to equal private savings. It's one and the same because the government doesn't provide any of those savings, but it is possible. So we have our upward sloping supply curve because as interest rates go up, I'm willing to put more money into an account that's going to pay me interest. I'm willing to, make it available as a loanable fund to other people to borrow. So people are willing to forego current consumption at higher interest rates. So if the interest rates go up, I'm willing to give up purchasing things now in order to make that interest on my savings account. All right, now as interest rates go up, so is the quantity of loanable funds that are going to be available because I'm going to put more in the bank at higher interest rates. All right, so that explains our upward sloping supply curve, our downward sloping demand curve. All right, so what are the things that are going to shift the supply curve of loanable funds? So one of the main two categories are changes in savings behavior. All right, so anything that's going to make us want to save more or save less. So tax changes or savings interest. So if the government says that I'm not going to pay as much taxes on the interest gains that I have on a savings account, I'm going to be willing to put more in. If they say that those taxes are going to be higher, I'm going to pull that money out. Income changes. If I get more money, if I make more money every week, I'm going to have more to put into the bank. So that way my savings, the loanable funds, will go up when my savings goes up as well. So equally, a GDP increase means that real incomes are going to increase as well. So keep an eye out for that one. All right, consumption changes. If I spend more of my money, if my MPC goes up, that means my MPS is going to go down. So anything that causes our MPC to increase is going to decrease the supply of loanable funds. All right, government savings. This isn't common because, it's been decades since we've actually had a government savings in any way, shape, or form. So it's not something that realistically happens often because the government is often deficit spending and borrowing for it. But if a question came up and said that the government had a surplus and they put money in, if they were able to save some money, that would increase loanable funds. All right, now this is one category. The other category is changes in financial capital inflow. Now this is money coming in from other countries. If we have a higher interest rate, or if we just seem like we're a politically stable country that's a good place to invest in, that's going to increase the supply of loanable funds. So international investor putting their money into the United States, loanable funds. The perception of a country are very important. If they perceive us as being good or perceive us as being bad, it's going to change the way that those loans go or those loanable funds go. If they think we're falling apart as a nation, they're going to pull funds out and supply of loanable funds will decrease. All right, so increase in supply is that right-shifting supply of loanable funds. And one of the key points to this is that the real interest rates will drop here. Supply of loanable funds increases, interest rates are going to drop. Now, what are some things that can cause this? All right, so the marginal propensity to save increases. There's lower taxes on interest gains. Higher incomes or higher GDP will increase the supply of loanable funds. Financial capital inflows increasing. International community perceives us as a safe place for money, that we are politically stable. Something a lot of these like sub-Saharan African countries are not as stable as we are. So people might be pulling funds out of those countries to put them into our country. Things like that. Money is going to go to where they feel it's safer and provides a higher return. Now, those two are highlighted in red because in the 2020 exam, you're probably not going to see anything with the financial capital inflows. You're not supposed to, at least, so don't worry so much about those for this year. All right. Now, government surplus, like I said, not a common thing, but theoretically it can happen. If they have a surplus, there could be some savings added. So just keep that, keep an eye open for that one. All right. Now, a decrease in supply is anything that's going to shift our curve to the left, in turn causing real interest rates to increase and the quantity of loanable funds, the equilibrium, to decrease as well. So what are some things that could do this? If the marginal propensity to consume increases, we start spending more of our disposable income, less is going to savings. Higher taxes on interest gains. Government decides to tax interest gains at a higher rate, there's less incentive for me to put money in there. All right, lower incomes. If everybody's making less money or GDP is down, that means there's going to be less money to save, assuming that the MPS and MPC have not changed. All right, financial capital outflows. All of a sudden, we're politically unstable. Money's leaving. Political instability. All right, so that is it for those particular shifts. All right, what causes the demand curve for loanable funds to shift to the left and to the right? Two big categories for this one as well. First one, perceived business opportunities. And this is kind of the bigger of the two because confidence in the economy or how the economy is perceived. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? The expectations of what's going to come in the future is going to cause demand to go up or down. If we think the economy is going to do great, we're shifting to the right. If we think it's going to do bad, we're going to stop investing so much, borrowing so much money to expand. And remember, with demand, it's the businesses borrowing money to expand, mainly to invest in capital so that they can expand their operations. So when the economy is doing good, they're going to want to borrow more. When the economy looks like it's going to do bad, they're going to start borrowing less. Now the rates of return too, and this ties into the perceived business opportunities. If we think we have a higher rate of return or we can get a higher rate of return, we're going to want to borrow more. If the economy is doing great, like during the 1990s, the tech boom, everybody thought this is the greatest time to be alive to invest in everything. So let's keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Same thing in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. So the rates of return were higher. Right now, amongst the corona outbreak, rates of return are probably going to be a little lower. They're not going to be wanting to borrow so much, so the demand for loanable funds will probably be going down. Now, tax changes as well. Any taxes on corporations, any taxes on, any type of business profit activity is going to deter investment. But if there's going to be a lower corporate tax, it's going to be an incentive for companies to invest more and shift that demand for loanable funds to the right. So it has to do with what businesses think they can or cannot do and how the tax rates change. Anything that makes it cheaper for businesses to produce based on taxes is going to cause them to invest more. Anything that makes those taxes go up is going to cause them to invest less. Now, the other big thing that does shift the demand curve for loanable funds is government borrowing. But it's only, or government spending, but only when it's deficit spending. All right. When the government has a surplus and they're spending, it isn't changing the demand for loanable funds. When they're borrowing money to spend, it is changing the demand for loanable funds. All right. So an increase in demand is a right shift of the demand curve. This is making the real interest rate higher. So tax credits on investment spending. If the government is giving businesses tax credits or tax breaks on investment spending, they're going to spend more. It's an incentive to do that. Increase on rates of return. Like I said, if the rate of return is higher on investment, they're going to invest more and the demand for loanable funds is going to go up. They're going to borrow more to invest more in their company. All right, optimism in the economy. Like I said, if they think everything's going great, they're going to build new buildings. They're going to buy new machines and they need to borrow to do that. All right, now the other big one, government deficit spending. And this is the one that does cause the crowding out. And I'll talk about that in just a minute, but keep these in mind. Anything that makes businesses want to invest more, to increase their capital, to increase their buildings, any of that is going to cause the demand for loanable funds to go up. Any government deficit spending, only deficit spending, is going to cause the demand for loanable funds to go up because they got to borrow that money from somebody when they're spending without the actual tax revenues to cover it. Decreases in demand. All right, things that will cause the demand curve to shift to the left and drop that interest rate. Tax increase on investment spending or tax increase on corporations, anything that would make their rate of return lower, anything that would make investing in capital and buildings not as profitable is going to cause that demand curve to go to the left. All right, a decrease on the rates of return, a drop in producer confidence. There's consumer confidence, there's producer confidence. If this is basically their optimism about the economy or their expectations. If they think things are going bad, demand for loanable funds is going to shift to the left. And a decrease in deficit spending. Now, keep that in mind. If they say they were deficit spending and then they cut back a little bit, that would decrease the demand for loanable funds. Not something you see usually, but it is a possibility. All right, so those are the causes of increases and decreases in the demand for loanable funds. All right, now there's a couple different ways these questions usually go. One usually has them dealing with capital formation and how loanable funds impacts that and how economic growth is impacted by that in the end. So capital formation is a real important concept and how that leads to economic growth. So low real interest rates are an incentive for investment spending, and that investment spending usually leads to capital formation. When capital formation increases, we're going to see economic growth. So how does this play out? So in the model to the left, we see our aggregate supply, aggregate demand. We are producing real GDP is at potential GDP. So those low real interest rates are going to cause aggregate demand to increase. Why? Because investment spending goes up. Investment spending is a key component of aggregate demand, C plus I plus G plus NX. So that aggregate demand shifts to the right. Businesses invest more in machinery, in capital, in buildings and all that stuff. Their capability to produce increases. We see it followed by the aggregate supply curve shifting right. And when this occurs this way, when investment leads to capital formation, we're going to see the long-run aggregate supply curve follow. Now, another way to portray this on a model is the production possibility frontier. All right, and that's portrayed by an expansion. It shifts outward. You know, it doesn't have to shift both sides equally, but it's going to expand and it's going to increase our production possibilities, the maximum combinations we can do of these different things. So both of these things illustrate the same thing, and that is economic growth. And that's usually where a lot of these questions end up. How is this going to impact the real interest rates, and how is this going to impact economic growth? All right, now, crowding out is another aspect that usually gets tossed into these questions. How is crowding out going to impact economic growth? So crowding out only occurs when deficit spending happens, because when the governments borrow money to cover their spending that they have or cover their transfer payments, what will happen? When they borrow, though, the demand for loanable funds is going to increase. It's going to shift to the right because they need that money from somewhere. So loanable funds is where they're getting that from. Real interest rates increase. When those real interest rates increase, it's going to slow growth. Why? All right. When real interest rates go up, investment starts to go down. The rates of return might not be high enough to cover these higher interest rates, so they start to invest less. What does that mean? That means there's going to be less capital formation. When capital formation goes down, it's not bringing us backwards. It's not like GDP is going to decrease. It's just slowing the growth. It's slowing the forward growth of the economy. So make sure you look out for these. There's usually going to be some aspect of crowding out, and it usually has to do something with slowing economic growth. All right, a few different terms that have come from FRQs throughout the years that are part of a loanable funds question. So reduces the tax rate on household interest earnings. All right, that means I want to save more. That means supply of loanable funds is going to go up. Increase savings for retirement. Anything that's increasing savings is shifting supply of loanable funds to the right. Effective fiscal policy. If there are deficit spending, that means demand for loanable funds is going to go up, and real interest rates are going to increase as well. We'll see some crowding out there. The impact of the increase in personal savings. Supply of loanable funds to the right. Finance through government borrowing. That's deficit spending right there. That means demand for loanable funds is going to the right. Granted a tax credit on spending for machinery. This means businesses, they want to buy more machinery. There's more of an incentive. How do they buy that machinery? They borrow, so the demand for loanable funds is going to increase because they have an incentive to buy more machinery, capital, investment. Investors move their funds out of the country. This is one of the outflows of financial capital. If other countries have a higher interest rate than we do, they're going to put their money there. So we're going to see outflow of loanable funds that would decrease the supply of loanable funds in our country. Now, tax rate on interest income from household savings is lowered, very similar to the first one up there. This means that I have more of an incentive to save my money and the supply of loanable funds will increase. So these are the types of wordings we're going to see. But most of these questions have two kind of endpoints to them. They want to know what is the impact on the real interest rate. So you're going to throw it into your loanable funds model and see what happens. And then what is the effect on economic growth? And that's usually about it. Whether it's how crowding out affects economic growth or how a government surplus affects economic growth. Who knows what the question will be, but these are the two big questions you usually end up answering. All right, now one more thing to point out. There are three causes of a change in the real interest rate. And the one we just covered is loanable funds, and that's usually the big one. However, inflation and nominal interest rates, if they're changing, real interest rates will change as well. Because nominal interest rates minus inflation rates are going to give us the real interest rate. So be careful on that too. If it's asking about real interest rates and you're like, this isn't about loanable funds, inflation and nominal interest rates can also have an impact on the real interest rates. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that and got something out of it. Make sure you're taking a look at my FRQ walkthroughs. Two that key in on this concept more so than others. The 2002 B exam number 2 and the 2007 B exam number 2 as well. Both of these are very specific to loanable funds and how savings and government deficits impact those curves. I think both of them have you draw out models and things like that. How are real interest rates affected? How are economic growth affected? So give these a try and check out my other videos. All right, until next time, guys, take care.